I discovered exactly how petty a homeowners association could be on December 8th, when I found a bright orange violation notice stapled to my front door like a scarlet letter. The notice informed me, in crisp bureaucratic language, that I had violated Section 12.7 of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA covenant by displaying excessive decorative accessories on my front lawn snowman. Apparently, the scarf, top hat, carrot nose, coal buttons, and stick arms constituted 6 separate accessories when the maximum allowable number was 3. My name is Xavier Thompson, and I had lived in Meadowbrook Heights in suburban Columbus, Ohio for exactly 18 months. I was a 34-year-old software engineer who worked remotely, which meant I spent most of my time in my modest 3-bedroom colonial watching my neighbors through the window while debugging code. The neighborhood was one of those places where every lawn looked identical, every mailbox was the same shade of black, and every house was painted in one of 4 approved colors. I should have known what I was getting into when I signed the papers, but the house had been within my budget and close to my parents', so I overlooked the 80-page covenant agreement. The Snowman had been built 3 days earlier during the first real snowfall of the season. My nephew Marcus had come over, and we spent 2 hours rolling snow into progressively larger spheres. He was 7 years old and took the entire operation seriously, insisting we get the proportions exactly right. When we finished, he dug through my garage and found an old top hat from a Halloween costume, a red scarf I never wore, and we improvised the rest with vegetables from my kitchen and some sticks from the backyard. The snowman stood about 5 feet tall in my front yard, positioned between 2 shrubs that the HOA mandated I maintain at precisely 30 inches in height. I stared at the violation notice and felt something shift inside me. The fine was $50, payable within 14 days, with an additional $25 per week if the violation was not corrected. I was required to either remove accessories from the snowman to bring the count to 3 or below, or remove the snowman entirely. The notice was signed by Patricia Hutchins, president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA board. Patricia Hutchins was exactly what you would picture if someone said the words HOA president out loud. She was 52 years old, had blonde hair cut in a severe bob that never moved in the wind, and wore pastel cardigans over pressed khakis like it was her uniform. She lived 4 houses down from me in the largest house on the block, a sprawling 2-story with a 3-car garage and a lawn that looked like it had been trimmed with scissors. I had interacted with her exactly twice since moving in. The first time, she welcomed me to the neighborhood with a basket of cleaning supplies and a laminated copy of the HOA rules. The second time, she knocked on my door to inform me that my garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, which violated Section 8.2. I walked back inside my house and dropped the notice on my kitchen counter. My coffee had gone cold while I was outside. I reheated it in the microwave and sat down at my laptop, pulling up the full HOA covenant document that I had saved as a PDF. I scrolled through pages of regulations about fence heights, approved plant species, and acceptable paint colors until I found Section 12. Section 12 covered seasonal decorations. Subsection 7 stated that winter decorations, including but not limited to snowmen, ice sculptures, and inflatable figures, could not contain more than 3 decorative accessories. Accessories were defined as any removable or attachable item not composed of snow or ice. The section had been implemented, according to the footnotes, in 2019, after a resident had built a snowman family with elaborate costumes and props that the board deemed excessive. I kept reading. Section 12, subsection 9 covered religious displays. It stated that residents were permitted to display religious decorations during appropriate holiday seasons, with no specific limit on the number of figures or accessories, provided the display was tasteful and did not exceed 10 feet in height or extend more than 15 feet from the house. The section noted that the HOA could not restrict religious expression under fair housing laws and constitutional protections. I sat back in my chair and felt a smile spread across my face. If Patricia Hutchins wanted to play games about decoration counts, I would play. But I would play by rules she could not touch. I spent the rest of that morning researching life-size nativity scenes. I found a company in Pennsylvania that manufactured commercial-grade fiberglass figures used by churches and shopping centers. Their catalog showed figures ranging from 4 to 6 feet tall, painted in realistic detail. A complete set with 12 figures, including Mary, Joseph, baby Jesus, 3 wise men, 3 shepherds, an angel, and 2 animals, cost $3,200 plus shipping. I entered my credit card information and selected expedited delivery. The figures would arrive in 6 days, on December 14th. That gave me time to plan the display location and prepare my yard. I measured the space between my front porch and the sidewalk, 15 feet exactly. The restrictions said the display could not extend more than 15 feet from the house, which meant I could use the entire front yard right up to the sidewalk. I called my brother Derek that afternoon. He was 2 years younger than me and worked in construction, which meant he had access to tools and an understanding of how to build things properly. "I need your help with a project," I said when he answered. "What kind of project?" "The kind that is going to make my HOA president lose her mind." Derek laughed. "I'm listening." I explained the situation with the Snowman violation and my plan for the nativity scene. Derek was quiet for a moment, then laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "You are going to build a 12-figure nativity scene because they said your snowman had too many accessories. The HOA covenant specifically protects religious displays. They cannot touch it. This is the best thing I have heard all year. When do you need me?" "The figures arrive on the 14th. I need to build platforms and set up lighting. Can you come over this weekend to help me prep?" "I will be there Saturday morning." I spent the next 2 days watching YouTube videos about outdoor nativity displays and sketching layouts on graph paper. I wanted the scene to be visible from the street, but arranged in a way that told the story. Mary and Joseph would be in the center with the manger, surrounded by shepherds on one side and wise men on the other. The angel would be elevated on a platform behind them, and I would position the animals near the manger. On Saturday morning, Derek arrived at 8 with his pickup truck full of lumber, power tools, and a cooler of energy drinks. He looked at my sketches spread across the kitchen table and nodded approvingly. "You are actually serious about this. Completely serious." We spent the morning building platforms from pressure-treated lumber. The angel platform was 4 feet tall, designed to elevate the figure above the others. The other platforms were smaller, just 6 inches high, to provide stability on the uneven ground. Derek cut the wood while I assembled the pieces with wood screws. By noon, we had 5 platforms complete. My neighbor to the left, an elderly man named George Martinez who had lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 30 years, came outside while we were working. He walked over slowly, leaning on his cane. "Building something, Xavier?" "A nativity scene." The HOA fined me for my snowman having too many accessories, so I decided to go bigger. George's face crinkled into a smile. "Patricia is not going to like this." "That is the point. Good for you. That woman has been making everyone miserable for years." Last summer she tried to find me because my grass was half an inch too long. He gestured at the platforms. If you need any help, let me know. I cannot do much these days, but I can supervise. I appreciate that, George. He stood there watching us work for a few more minutes, then headed back inside. Derek looked at me and raised his eyebrows. You have allies. I am starting to think I am not the only person in this neighborhood who is tired of Patricia's nonsense. We finished the platforms by mid-afternoon and started planning the lighting. I wanted the display to be visible at night, which meant I needed spotlights and maybe some string lights for atmosphere. Derek suggested using LED floodlights on stakes that I could position around the figures. You want this to be seen from space? He asked. I want it to be seen from Patricia's house. We drove to the home improvement store and bought 6 LED floodlights, 200 feet of outdoor extension cords, and a heavy-duty power strip. I also grabbed 3 boxes of white string lights and some zip ties. The total came to $436. I did not care. This had stopped being about Christmas decorations and started being about principle. On our way back to my house, we drove past Patricia's house. She was outside, kneeling beside a flower bed, planting something even though it was December and the ground would freeze solid in another week. She looked up as we drove by, and I saw her eyes narrow when she recognized my truck. She already knows something is up, Derek said. Good. Let her wonder. The figures arrived on schedule the following Friday afternoon. The delivery truck blocked the street for 20 minutes while the driver and I unloaded 12 enormous boxes. Each figure was packed in foam and weighed between 40 and 80 pounds. My doorbell rang twice while we were unloading. I ignored it both times. By the time we got all the boxes into my garage, my back was screaming and my arms felt like rubber. I tipped the driver $50 and closed the garage door. Then I opened the first box. Mary was beautiful. The fiberglass was molded in incredible detail, from the folds of her blue robe to the gentle expression on her painted face. She was 5 feet tall, designed to be displayed in a kneeling position beside the manger. I unpacked her carefully and set her against the garage wall. Joseph came next, then the baby Jesus in his manger. The wise men were elaborately dressed in robes of purple, gold, and red. The shepherds wore simple brown tunics and carried wooden staffs. The angel was magnificent, 6 feet tall with white robes and golden wings that attached with bolts. The 2 animals were a donkey and a lamb, both molded in realistic poses. I spent that evening cleaning the figures with a damp cloth and checking them for shipping damage. Everything was perfect. Derek came over after work, and we started carrying the figures out to the front yard. The sun had set by the time we positioned the first platform. We worked by the light of my porch and the flashlights on our phones. The angel went up first, on the tallest platform, positioned slightly behind where the manger would be. We bolted the angel's wings in place and secured the figure to the platform with metal brackets. Mary and Joseph went on either side of the manger in the center of the display. The wise men went to the right, arranged in a line as if they were approaching. The shepherds went to the left, with the lamb near their feet. The donkey stood behind Mary, and we positioned it so it looked like it was watching over the scene. By 10 o'clock, all 12 figures were in place. Derek and I stood on the sidewalk, looking at our work. Even without the lights, the display was impressive. The figures looked almost alive in the shadows, their painted faces serene. Patricia is going to have an aneurysm, Derek said. I am counting on it. We spent another hour setting up the lights. The floodlights went on stakes driven into the ground, positioned to illuminate the figures from the front and sides. I wrapped the string lights around the platforms and the angel's wings, creating a soft glow that contrasted with the bright floods. When we plugged everything in, the display lit up like a Broadway stage. It was spectacular. The white lights made the angel look like it was actually glowing. The floodlights cast dramatic shadows and highlighted the details of the robes and faces. You could see the display clearly from 2 blocks away. Derek whistled. "This is definitely going to be seen from space. Perfect." We stood there for a few more minutes, admiring our work. A car drove by slowly, and I saw the driver's head turn to stare. Another car passed, then another. By the time Derek left at 11, there were 3 cars parked on the street with people taking photos. I went inside and slept better than I had in weeks. I woke up Saturday morning to my doorbell ringing insistently. I stumbled downstairs in my sweatpants and opened the door to find Patricia Hutchins standing on my porch. Her face was red and her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk about your front yard." "Good morning, Patricia. What about my front yard?" "That display is completely inappropriate. It is excessive, it is gaudy, and it violates multiple HOA covenants." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Which covenants would those be?" Section 12 clearly limits decorative displays. Section 12 subsection 9 specifically permits religious displays with no limit on the number of figures. I have 12 figures, which is well within the guidelines. Patricia's face got redder. The intent of that section is to allow reasonable religious expression, not ostentatious displays designed to annoy your neighbors. The section does not mention intent. It provides clear guidelines, and my display meets all of them. The figures are under 10 feet tall, and the display does not extend more than 15 feet from my house. I measured. The lighting is excessive. The covenant does not limit lighting on religious displays. You are deliberately trying to circumvent the spirit of the HOA rules. I smiled. I am following the HOA rules exactly as they are written. If you have a problem with that, you are welcome to call an emergency board meeting and try to change them. But I think you will find that restricting religious displays opens the HOA up to discrimination lawsuits. Patricia stared at me for a long moment. I could see her jaw working like she was chewing on words she wanted to spit at me but could not quite justify. Finally, she turned and walked back to her car without another word. I closed the door and pumped my fist in the air. Round 1 to Xavier. The story spread through the neighborhood faster than I expected. By Saturday afternoon, I had a steady stream of visitors. Some were genuinely interested in the display and wanted to take pictures. Others, like George from next door, came by to congratulate me on standing up to Patricia. A few people knocked on my door to ask where I got the figures because they wanted to put up similar displays. My neighbor to the right, a woman named Susan Chen who worked as a nurse, came over around 2 in the afternoon. She was carrying a plate of cookies. "I wanted to thank you," she said when I answered the door. "For what?" "For doing what the rest of us have been too scared to do. Patricia has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Last spring, she tried to fine me because my son's bicycle was visible from the street. It was in our driveway. That is ridiculous. That is Patricia. She thinks being HOA president makes her the queen of Meadowbrook Heights." Susan handed me the cookies. "These are for you, and if you need anything, let me know. Half the neighborhood is on your side." After Susan left, I called my parents to tell them what was happening. My mother thought the whole thing was hilarious. My father, who had worked as an attorney before retiring, gave me some advice. "Make sure you document everything," he said. "Keep copies of all correspondence with the HOA. If Patricia tries to fine you or take any action against you, you will want a paper trail. You think she will try something? I know her type. She is not going to let this go. She will look for any violation she can find to punish you." My father was right. On Monday morning, I found another orange notice on my door. This one cited me for having extension cords visible from the street, which allegedly violated Section 9.4 regarding exterior home maintenance. The fine was $75. I took a photo of the notice, then went outside and examined my extension cords. They ran from an outlet on my porch to the display, hidden behind the foundation plantings as much as possible. You could see them if you were specifically looking, but they were not exactly an eyesore. I checked Section 9.4. It said that exterior utilities and equipment should be screened from street view where practical, but it did not mandate complete invisibility. I drafted an email to Patricia, citing the exact language of the covenant and explaining that my cords were screened to the extent practical. I attached photos showing how the cords were positioned. Then I sent a copy to all 5 members of the HOA board, along with a polite request for clarification on how I could further screen the cords without violating other covenants regarding landscaping modifications. I did not receive a response. On Tuesday, I got another notice. This one said my display was creating a traffic hazard because cars were slowing down to look at it. The fine was $100, and I was ordered to remove the display within 48 hours. I called my father. "Can she do that?" I asked. "Not legally. The HOA does not have jurisdiction over public streets. If there is a traffic issue, that is a matter for the city, but she is hoping you do not know that." I called the Columbus non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher was patient while I laid out the details about the HOA and the display and Patricia's claim about traffic hazards. "Has anyone from the city contacted you about this?" the dispatcher asked. "No. This is just the HOA president. If there was a traffic safety issue, the city would send someone from the traffic division to assess it. Your homeowners association does not have authority to make that determination. If you want, I can have an officer swing by to document that there is no hazard." "That would be great, thank you." An officer arrived an hour later. He was a young guy, maybe late 20s, who introduced himself as Officer James Riley. He walked around the display, took some photos, and stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes watching traffic. "I do not see any hazard here," he said finally. "Cars are slowing down, but they are not stopping in the street or blocking traffic. People slow down to look at Christmas lights all the time. It is not a violation. Can you write that down somewhere official? I will file a report stating that I responded to a concern about a traffic hazard at this address and found no violation. You can request a copy from the records department if you need it. Thank you, officer." After he left, I sent another email to Patricia and the board, this time with a copy of the police report attached. I politely suggested that future concerns about traffic safety be directed to the appropriate city departments rather than being handled through HOA violations. This time I got a response. It was from Patricia and said simply, "The board will be reviewing your display and all associated violations at our next meeting on December 20th. Your presence is requested but not required." I marked the date on my calendar. The next week passed without any new violation notices, which made me nervous. Patricia was not the type to give up, which meant she was planning something. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. The display, meanwhile, had become a neighborhood attraction. Every evening, families would walk by to look at the figures. Someone started leaving small toys and candy canes on the manger as offerings. A local church group came by and sang carols on the sidewalk. The Columbus Dispatch sent a reporter to interview me about the display and my conflict with the HOA. The resulting article ran on page 3 of the local section, with a photo of the nativity scene lit up at night. The attention made Patricia furious. I knew this because my mailbox suddenly became a target for petty violation notices. I was cited for having a package delivered and left on my porch for 4 hours during a workday. I was cited because one of my shutters was slightly faded compared to the others. I was cited because my mailbox post had a small rust spot. I responded to each citation with detailed emails explaining why the violations were either not actually violations or so minor that they did not warrant fines. I sent copies of everything to all 5 board members and started BCCing my father, just in case I needed legal advice later. On December 20th, I drove to the HOA meeting, which was held in the community center at the entrance to Meadowbrook Heights. The community center was a single-story brick building with a meeting room that held about 40 people. When I arrived at 7, the parking lot was almost full. Inside, the meeting room was packed. I recognized most of the faces as neighbors from my street and the surrounding blocks. Susan Chen was there, along with George Martinez and at least 20 other people I had seen around the neighborhood. They were all sitting in the folding chairs facing the front table where Patricia and the other board members sat. Patricia looked shocked by the turnout. Normally, HOA meetings drew maybe 5 or 6 people. Tonight, there were at least 35. I took a seat near the back and waited. Patricia called the meeting to order and started with routine business, approving the minutes from the last meeting and discussing the budget for snow removal. She was clearly stalling, hoping people would get bored and leave. No one moved. Finally, she cleared her throat and said, "We have one final item on the agenda tonight, Mr. Xavier Thompson's front yard display. The board has received multiple complaints about the display being excessive and not in keeping with the character of Meadowbrook Heights." "What complaints?" someone called from the audience. "I love that display." Patricia ignored the interruption. "The board is considering amending Section 12 to place limits on the size and scope of religious displays in order to maintain neighborhood aesthetics." I stood up. "Can I speak?" Patricia looked like she wanted to say no, but there were too many people watching. "You may address the board, Mr. Thompson." I walked to the front of the room. I built my nativity scene in full compliance with the HOA covenant. Section 12 subsection 9 specifically permits religious displays with no limit on figure count, as long as the display does not exceed 10 feet in height or extend more than 15 feet from the house. My display meets both requirements. Attempting to change the rules now, after I have already invested significant time and money into a compliant display, would be discriminatory and likely illegal. "We are not targeting you specifically," Patricia said. "We are proposing a rule change that would apply to all residents." "You are proposing this rule change specifically because of my display. That is obvious to everyone in this room, and you should know that restricting religious displays opens the HOA up to lawsuits under the Fair Housing Act and the First Amendment." Someone in the audience started clapping. Then someone else joined in. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. Patricia's face turned deep red. "The board will take Mr. Thompson's comments under advisement." George Martinez stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, and I have watched this board become more and more controlling. You fine people for having their grass a half-inch too long. You fine them for having decorations you do not like. You fine them for parking their own cars in their own driveways. This is supposed to be a community, not a dictatorship." More applause. Susan Chen stood next. "I second everything George said. This board has overstepped its authority repeatedly. If you try to punish Xavier for following the rules, I will personally help him find a lawyer." Patricia slammed her hand on the table. "This meeting is adjourned. We have not voted on the rule change," one of the other board members said. His name was Richard Caldwell, and he was a quiet man in his 60s who rarely spoke at meetings. "There is nothing to vote on," Patricia snapped. "We will table this discussion until next month." "I move that we do not table it," Richard said. "I move that we vote now on whether to pursue changes to Section 12 regarding religious displays." "I second that motion," said another board member, a woman named Jennifer Wu. Patricia looked furious, but she was trapped by the board's own procedural rules. "Fine. All in favor of pursuing changes to Section 12, Patricia raised her hand. No one else did. All opposed, 4 hands went up. The motion failed. Richard looked at me and nodded slightly. I nodded back. The meeting broke up a few minutes later. People came up to congratulate me on the way out. George patted me on the shoulder and said, "That woman has needed someone to stand up to her for years. I am glad it was you." I drove home feeling victorious, but my father's warning kept echoing in my head. Patricia was not the type to let this go. I was right to be worried. On December 22nd, I came home from a grocery run to find a letter from the HOA attorney in my mailbox. The letter informed me that the board had voted to assess a special fine of $500 for creating a public nuisance with my display. The letter cited the traffic situation, the excessive lighting, and the general disruption to the neighborhood's peaceful character. I read the letter twice, then called my father. He told me to forward it to him immediately. "This is harassment," he said after reading it. "They voted down the rule change at the meeting, so now they are trying to use vague language about public nuisance to get around their own covenant. I will draft a response, but you should also consider filing a complaint with the Ohio Real Estate Commission. HOAs are supposed to follow their own rules and governing documents." My father's response was 3 pages long and cited multiple Ohio court cases about HOA overreach. He sent it directly to the HOA attorney with a warning that any further harassment would result in legal action against both the HOA and Patricia Hutchins personally. The special fine was quietly withdrawn 2 days later. Christmas came and went. I spent it with my family, and when I came home late on Christmas night, there were at least 50 people standing in my front yard, looking at the Nativity display. Some were neighbors, but many were strangers who had driven from other parts of Columbus after seeing the Dispatch article. I parked in my driveway and walked through the crowd. People were taking photos and talking quietly. A few were praying. It felt good. Whatever else happened with the HOA, I had created something that brought people joy. On December 27th, I was working at my kitchen table when I heard a crash from the front yard. I ran outside to find one of the wise men toppled over, his staff broken. Standing over the figure was Patricia Hutchins, holding a baseball bat. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. Patricia turned to me and I saw something wild in her eyes. "You have made my life a nightmare. The other board members are threatening to vote me out as president. My neighbors will not speak to me. Someone left a nasty note on my car. This is all your fault. So you are destroying my property. You should have just taken down the stupid Snowman." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Patricia, you need to leave my property right now." Instead of leaving, she swung the bat at the angel. It connected with the fiberglass wing, cracking it down the middle. I kept recording as she hit the angel again, then moved toward the manger. "Stop," I yelled. "I am calling the police." Patricia swung at Joseph, knocking the figure off its platform. The fiberglass head cracked when it hit the ground. I dialed 911 while Patricia continued her rampage. She destroyed 2 of the shepherds and damaged the donkey before police sirens wailed in the distance. She froze when she heard them, then dropped the bat and ran. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes. I showed the officers the damage and played them the video I had recorded. One of the officers radioed for Patricia's address, and they went to her house to arrest her. I spent the next 2 hours giving a statement and documenting the damage. 4 of the 12 figures were destroyed beyond repair. 3 others had significant damage. The total cost to replace and repair everything would be close to $2,000. Patricia was arrested and charged with criminal mischief and vandalism. She spent the night in jail and was released on bond the next morning. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as president. Richard Caldwell was appointed as interim president. The story made the news again, this time with a much bigger splash. The Dispatch ran it as a front-page story with the headline, "HOA President Arrested After Destroying Residents' Christmas Display." The local TV stations picked it up, and by noon on December 28th, I had reporters on my lawn asking for interviews. I gave one interview to a local news station, explaining the whole saga from the Snowman violation to Patricia's arrest. The story went viral on social media. By the end of the week, I had been contacted by Good Morning America and several other national outlets. Patricia's attorney reached out in early January with a settlement offer. Patricia would pay for all damages to the Nativity display and agree to resign from the HOA board permanently. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue additional civil charges. I accepted the offer after consulting with my father. The repairs were completed by mid-January. The damaged figures were replaced, and the display looked as good as new. I left it up through the end of January, partly because people were still coming by to see it, and partly because I had earned the right to leave it up as long as I wanted. The HOA board, under Richard's leadership, voted to amend the covenant in February. The new rules clarified that residents had the right to display seasonal decorations within reason, and that the board could not issue fines for subjective complaints about displays being too elaborate or excessive. The board also implemented a new rule requiring all violation notices to be reviewed and approved by at least 3 board members before being issued, preventing any single person from abusing their authority. Patricia pleaded guilty to vandalism in March and was sentenced to community service and probation. She and her husband put their house on the market in April and moved out of Meadowbrook Heights by the end of May. I kept the Nativity figures in my garage, carefully packed away for next December. The Snowman accessories went back in the hall closet, and when winter rolled around again, I built another snowman in my front yard. This one had exactly 6 accessories: a top hat, a scarf, a carrot nose, coal buttons, stick arms, and a small sign that read HOA compliant. George Martinez came over while I was putting the finishing touches on the snowman. He laughed when he saw the sign. "You are going to make the new board nervous," he said. "Richard knows I am just having fun. Besides, they changed the rules. I could give this snowman 20 accessories if I wanted. Are you going to put up the nativity scene again this year?" "Absolutely. It is tradition now." And I did. On December 1st, Derek came over and we set up all 12 figures in the front yard. We replaced the broken platforms and added new lights. The display looked even better than it had the year before. This time, there were no violation notices. No angry visits from board members. No fines. Just neighbors stopping by to admire the display and families taking photos on the sidewalk. On Christmas Eve, I stood in my front yard watching people walk past. An older couple stopped to look at the nativity scene, and the woman turned to me. "This is beautiful," she said. "We drive past it every evening. It reminds us of what Christmas is supposed to be about." "Thank you," I said. That means a lot. After they left, I sat on my porch steps and looked at the 12 figures illuminated by the floodlights and string lights. The angels' repaired wings gleamed in the glow. Mary and Joseph knelt peacefully beside the manger. The wise men stood in their line, forever approaching with their gifts. I thought about the Snowman violation that had started everything. If Patricia had just left me alone, I would have built my snowman and moved on with my life. But she had pushed, and I had pushed back, and in the process, I had learned something important about standing up to bullies, even when they hide behind rules and regulations. The nativity scene had started as an act of defiance, a way to exploit the HOA rules and prove a point. But it had become something more. It had brought the neighborhood together. It had exposed Patricia's abuse of power and led to real changes in how the HOA operated. And it had given me a sense of belonging in Meadowbrook Heights that I had not felt before. I went inside and poured myself a glass of wine. Through the window, I could see the glow of the lights reflecting off the snow. Somewhere in the distance, I heard people singing carols. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Merry Christmas, brother." That nativity scene is still the best revenge I have ever seen. I smiled and typed back, "Merry Christmas. Same time next year. Would not miss it." I set down my phone and raised my glass toward the window, toward the 12 figures standing guard in my front yard. They had cost me $3,000, countless hours of work, and more stress than any Christmas decoration should cause. But they had been worth every penny and every minute. Because sometimes, the best way to deal with petty tyranny is not to fight it directly, but to find the loopholes, exploit the rules, and turn the system against itself. Patricia had tried to control me with regulations about snowman accessories. I had responded with a display she could not touch, protected by the same covenant she had tried to use as a weapon. And in the end, I had won. Not just the battle over the decorations, but the larger war over who got to decide what my home looked like and how I expressed myself. The nativity scene would go up every December for as long as I lived in Meadowbrook Heights. It was my tradition now, my statement, my reminder that even in a place governed by endless rules and restrictions, there was still room for creativity, defiance, and faith. The 12 figures stood in my front yard through the end of January, just like they had the previous year. This time, though, there was no controversy, no violation notices, no dramatic confrontations. Just a beautiful display that people enjoyed, and a neighborhood that had learned to appreciate the difference between reasonable rules and unreasonable control. When I finally packed away the figures in early February, I did so carefully, wrapping each one in blankets and storing them in protective boxes. These were not just decorations anymore. They were symbols of resistance, monuments to the idea that ordinary people could stand up to petty authority and win. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered where she had moved and whether she had learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like her rarely did. But she was gone from Meadowbrook Heights, and that was what mattered. The neighborhood was better without her constant surveillance and nitpicking enforcement of rules designed to make everyone conform to her vision of suburban perfection. Richard Caldwell turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He enforced the rules when necessary, but did so with common sense and flexibility. He responded to emails promptly and treated residents like adults rather than children who needed constant supervision. Under his leadership, the HOA became what it was supposed to be, a body that maintained property values and provided basic services without micromanaging everyone's lives. In March, the neighborhood held its first community barbecue in 5 years. Patricia had canceled the tradition shortly after becoming president, claiming it was too difficult to organize and created liability issues for the HOA. Richard reinstated it, and more than 60 families showed up. We grilled burgers and hot dogs. The kids ran around playing games, and people actually talked to each other like neighbors instead of strangers who happened to live on the same street. George Martinez cornered me near the grill and handed me a beer. "You know what you did, right?" he said. "I built a nativity scene." "You did more than that. You reminded everyone that we do not have to accept being pushed around. Half the people here spent years being afraid of Patricia and her violation notices. You showed them that the rules could work for us instead of against us." "I just wanted to make a point about the Snowman. You made a bigger point than that, and we are all grateful." I looked around at the crowd, at the families laughing and eating together, at the kids playing soccer in the community center field. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to feel like. Not a collection of houses governed by oppressive rules, but a community where people supported each other and stood up for what was right. The nativity scene had done that. Or maybe I had done it by refusing to back down and finding a creative way to fight back. Either way, Meadowbrook Heights was a better place than it had been a year ago, and I had played a part in making it that way. As summer turned to fall and fall turned to winter again, I started thinking about the upcoming Christmas season. The nativity figures were waiting in my garage, carefully stored and ready to be displayed. I planned to put them up the day after Thanksgiving, earlier than I had the previous years, because I knew people were expecting them. Derek called me in mid-November to confirm his availability to help with the setup. "You are definitely doing it again this year?" he asked. "Absolutely. It is tradition." "Any concerns about the HOA?" "None. Richard is not going to give me trouble and the rules are clear. I am in the clear." "Good, because I have been bragging to everyone about my brother who took down a tyrant HOA president with Christmas decorations." I laughed. "That is a weird thing to brag about." "It is an awesome thing to brag about. You are a legend." The day after Thanksgiving, Derek and I set up the nativity scene for the third year. We had the process down to a science now. The platforms went up first, then the figures, then the lights. We worked efficiently, and the entire display was complete and illuminated by early afternoon. That evening, as the sun set and the lights came on, people started arriving to see the display. Some were neighbors who had watched the saga unfold from the beginning. Others were newcomers to Meadowbrook Heights who had heard the story and wanted to see the famous nativity scene in person. A local news crew showed up around 7, doing a follow-up story on the display and its history. I gave a brief interview, explaining how the nativity scene had started as a response to an unfair HOA violation and had become a beloved neighborhood tradition. The reporter asked if I planned to keep putting up the display in future years. "As long as I live here," I said. "This is part of who I am now." The story aired the next evening, and once again, my display became a small sensation. People drove from across Columbus to see it. The local church featured it in their Christmas program. Someone even made a parody song about it that went semi-viral on TikTok. But the best moment came on Christmas Eve, when I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a card signed by 43 families from Meadowbrook Heights. The message was simple: "Thank you for standing up for all of us. Merry Christmas from your neighbors." I stood on my porch reading the card, feeling something warm and solid settle in my chest. This was what I had been fighting for all along, even if I had not realized it at the time. Not just the right to decorate my own yard, but the right to live without fear of arbitrary punishment, to express myself freely, and to be part of a community that valued those things. The nativity scene glowed in the darkness, the 12 figures standing their eternal vigil. The angel's wings caught the light and seemed to shimmer. Mary and Joseph watched over the manger with serene expressions. The wise men offered their gifts, and the shepherds kept watch, just as they had for 2,000 years in the story the scene depicted. I had built this display out of spite and frustration, as a way to exploit a loophole and prove a point. But it had become something sacred, not because of any religious significance, but because it represented something fundamental about human dignity and resistance to oppression. It stood as a testament to the idea that even the smallest acts of defiance could create ripples that changed everything. Patricia Hutchins had tried to fine me for giving my snowman too many accessories. She had tried to use the HOA covenant as a weapon to enforce her vision of suburban conformity. And she had failed, not because I was smarter or more powerful, but because I had refused to back down and had found a creative way to turn her own rules against her. The 12 figures in my front yard were more than decorations. They were a promise that I would never let anyone make me feel small or powerless in my own home. They were a reminder that rules could be tools of liberation as well as oppression, depending on who wielded them and how they were used. And they were a celebration of the community that had come together to support me when I needed it most. As midnight approached on Christmas Eve, I turned off the outdoor lights and prepared to head to bed. Through the window, I could see the dark silhouettes of the nativity figures against the snow. Tomorrow, families would come by again to take photos and admire the display. Children would leave offerings at the manger. People would stop and pause and remember what the season was supposed to mean. And Patricia Hutchins, wherever she was, would know that she had lost. Not just the battle over the decorations or her position on the HOA board, but the larger war over the soul of Meadowbrook Heights. The neighborhood belonged to the people who lived there, not to petty tyrants who used their positions to make others miserable. I climbed into bed that night feeling satisfied and content. The nativity scene would stand in my front yard for another month, bringing joy to everyone who saw it. And next December, I would put it up again, along with a snowman decorated with as many accessories as I wanted, because that was my right as a homeowner and a human being. And no HOA president, no matter how determined or vindictive, could ever take that away from me again.